Some stories end with a final bell, a 3 count on the mat, a hand raised in victory, a quiet walk back through the curtain into a life of peace and memory. But other stories don't end. They pause. They become whispers, then legends. They leave behind a silence so deafening it becomes its own kind of noise, a constant unanswered question. This is a story about the loudest silence of all, and the day it was finally broken. For years, she disappeared. No matches, no interviews, no grainy fan photos from a coffee shop, no whispered rumors of a return. She was simply gone, a ghost in the machine of a sport that never, ever forgets. Then suddenly, under the bright lights, she made the loudest return of the decade. They called her Aurora Vance, but to the world, she was the Comet. The name was a prophecy. She burned impossibly bright, a celestial event streaking across the wrestling universe. And then, just as suddenly, she vanished into the black. Her career wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. A 4-year reign of such dominance and artistry that it redefined what a champion could be. She moved with a dangerous grace, a blend of raw power and balletic precision that left opponents and audiences breathless. Her matches weren't just contests, they were narratives, each one a chapter in a saga of untouchable greatness. She never held the microphone to shout catchphrases or insult her rivals. She didn't need to. Her story was told in the arch of her back as she delivered her finishing move, the Nova Crash, and in the cold, unreadable expression she wore as the referee's hand hit the mat for the 3rd time. Then, at the absolute zenith of her power, after defending her title in what many still call the greatest match of all time, she simply walked away. No press conference, no farewell tour. Her championship was vacated. Her merchandise was quietly pulled from the shelves. Her name became a sacred, unspoken word. The industry tried to move on, but it couldn't. Every new champion was measured against her shadow. Every rising star was called the next Comet, a title that was both a blessing and a curse. For 7 years, the wrestling world was haunted by the ghost of a queen who had abdicated her throne without a single word of explanation. It was the main event of the biggest show of the year, Perdition. The reigning champion, a fierce and hungry brawler named Jessica Thorne, stood victorious over her fallen opponent. The pyrotechnics exploded, the crowd roared, but it was a familiar scene, the predictable end to a long night. As Thorne raised her championship belt, the arena lights began to flicker. One by one, they died, plunging the stadium into an unnerving electric darkness. The champion's theme music warped, slowed, and then dissolved into static. A single, pure white spotlight sliced through the black, illuminating the entrance ramp. The crowd held its collective breath, a wave of confusion and anticipation washing over 80,000 people. Then, a silhouette appeared, unmistakable. The posture, the quiet confidence. It was a memory made real. The silence broke. It didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces of pure, unadulterated noise. It was a sound of disbelief, of joy, of years of pent-up questions erupting at once. Aurora Vance, the Comet, walked down the ramp. She hadn't aged, but she had changed. The fire in her eyes was replaced by a calm, deep ocean. She wore no wrestling gear, just a simple black jacket and jeans. She stepped into the ring, circling the stunned champion, her gaze never leaving the gold belt on Thorne's shoulder. Thorne, a woman who feared no one, took an involuntary step back. Aurora leaned into the referee's microphone. The entire world leaned in with her. She spoke one sentence, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the pandemonium. "I never lost this." And then she was gone. Before Aurora even reached the curtain, the internet was no longer a place of discussion. It was a digital supernova. The phrase, "she's back," trended globally in over 90 countries within 3 minutes. It wasn't just a wrestling story. It was a cultural event. News channels that wouldn't spare a second for sports entertainment cut away from their programming to show the grainy fan-shot footage. The clip of her saying those 4 words was looped, analyzed, and remixed into 1,000 memes. Her face, once a relic of a bygone era, was now everywhere, a symbol of a mystery that had suddenly, violently, reopened. Theories ignited like brush fires. Was she back for the money? Was she back for the glory? Had she been driven by some secret feud all this time? Online forums that had been dormant for years roared back to life, old fans emerging from the woodwork to share their excitement and disbelief. A new generation, who had only known her through video packages and Hall of Fame tributes, was now scrambling to understand the sheer magnitude of this moment. They watched her old matches, trying to comprehend the mythology that their parents and older siblings had spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It was a rare, beautiful moment of shared cultural shock. For one night, the cynical, fractured landscape of social media became a global amphitheater, united by a single, simple, and utterly mind-bending event. The comet had returned to the sky, and no one, absolutely no one, could look away. The world hadn't just been put on notice. It had been brought to a complete and total standstill. If the world outside was in chaos, the world behind the curtain was a pressure cooker of controlled panic and raw emotion. When Aurora's silhouette appeared, the gorilla position, the nerve center of the show, fell silent. Veteran producers, hardened road agents, and stoic executives stood frozen, their faces masks of pure shock. This wasn't in the script. It wasn't in any meeting. This was a ghost walking back into her own home, uninvited. Jessica Thorne, the champion, stumbled backstage, her reign and victory lap utterly overshadowed. She wasn't angry. She was rattled, disoriented. The woman she had built her entire career in the shadow of was suddenly real. And Thorne had just seen in Aurora's eyes a depth she couldn't comprehend. The locker room was divided. The older wrestlers, those who had known Aurora, who had shared a ring with her, felt a mix of awe and dread. They remembered her intensity, her unnerving focus. They knew this was not a publicity stunt. The younger talent, the ones who had posters of the comet on their walls as kids, were starstruck and terrified. They had been competing for a championship. Aurora Vance was competing for a legacy. She wasn't just another opponent. She was the final boss, a living legend they never thought they'd have to face. Whispers followed her as a small security team escorted her to a private room. "Did you see her?" She didn't even blink. What does this mean for the title? The foundations of the company's future plans, meticulously laid out for months, had been reduced to rubble in under 5 minutes. The days that followed were a blur of media obligations. Aurora found herself in a world she no longer recognized, a world that had tried to memorialize her while she was still alive. Her face was plastered on every screen, her old theme music played on every show. But it wasn't her. It was the face of a 25-year-old prodigy, a fierce, hungry champion at the peak of her physical powers. That girl was a stranger to the 32-year-old woman sitting in sterile television studios. The network ran endless highlight reels of the Nova crash, of her impossible victories and her cold, emotionless celebrations. They were selling a myth, a legend, and Aurora was expected to inhabit it, to become the ghost everyone remembered. But she couldn't. The fire that once burned so brightly was now a quiet, controlled ember. The unwavering certainty was now a quiet resolve. The pressure was immense. It wasn't about winning another match. It was about not tarnishing the flawless memory she had left behind. Could she still move like that? Could she still endure the pain? Did she even want to? Every fan who cheered her name, every journalist who asked about her past, was adding another stone to the monument of her legacy. A monument she now had to live up to, or risk shattering completely. Late at night, in empty hotel rooms, she would see her reflection and wonder who was really staring back. Aurora Vance, the woman, or the comet, the untouchable idea that had grown far bigger than the person who created it. There was one phone call she had been dreading. Her father, Marcus Vance, had been her coach, her mentor, the architect of the comet. He was a man of few words and impossibly high standards. He had sculpted her into a champion, but their relationship had fractured under the immense pressure, becoming a casualty of her success. The night she walked away 7 years ago, she had walked away from him too. She dialed the number, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. He answered on the second ring. "Aurora," he said. His voice was the same, calm, gravelly, betraying nothing. She waited for the lecture, for the questions, for the anger. It never came. "I saw you," he said simply. "You looked calm." She didn't know what to say. How could she explain the last 7 years? How could she explain the real reason she was back, a reason he would never understand? "They want me to have a match," she said, her voice small, "for the title." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence filled with 1,000 unspoken conversations, 1,000 hours of training, 1,000 shared victories, and one profound loss. "Don't let them make you something you're not," he finally said. "You know what you have to do." He didn't ask if she was ready. He didn't offer to help. He simply stated a fact, his faith in her ability, or perhaps his understanding of her burden, as absolute as it had always been. The call ended. She was alone again, but the weight of his words, the quiet expectation in his voice, was heavier than any championship belt. The company, eager to capitalize on the moment, arranged a face-to-face confrontation in the ring between Aurora and the champion, Jessica Thorne. It was meant to be a tense but respectful passing of the torch segment, setting the stage for their historic match. But it didn't go as planned. Thorne, no longer rattled but filled with a fiery indignation, held the microphone first. She spoke of how she had revered Aurora, how she had studied her every move. But then her tone shifted. "You were a legend," Thorne said, her voice dripping with a mix of respect and resentment. "But legends belong in history books. This is my ring now. This is my era. You walked out on us, on everyone who believed in you. You don't get to just walk back in and claim what you abandoned." The crowd was divided. The words were harsh, but they held a kernel of truth. All eyes turned to Aurora. They expected a cool, dismissive retort. They expected the unshakable confidence of the comet. Instead, for the first time, they saw a flicker of something else, a flash of pain, a hint of weariness. Aurora took the mic, and her hand trembled, just for a second. "You're right," she said softly, the words quieting the entire arena. "You are the champion you are today because I wasn't here. But you don't understand why I left. You don't know what it costs." She turned and walked away, leaving Thorne and the world with more questions than answers. The perfect polished armor of the returning hero had its first visible crack. The media narrative began to pivot. The initial euphoria of her return gave way to a more critical, speculative tone. Was she in over her head? Had the sport passed her by? Pundits questioned her cryptic comments, framing her as emotionally fragile, a legend perhaps better left as a memory. The pressure was closing in, and Aurora retreated further into herself. One evening, after a grueling public workout designed to prove she was still in fighting shape, she sat alone in the vast, empty locker room. The mirrors that lined the walls showed her reflection 100 times over. She wasn't looking at her physique. She was looking into her own eyes. She saw the exhaustion, the deep, profound sadness she had carried for 7 years, a burden no one could see. The cheering crowds, the flashing cameras, the championship title, it was all just noise, a distraction from the quiet, singular purpose that had driven her back to this place. She took off a small, simple silver locket she always wore, a piece of jewelry everyone had assumed was just an accessory. She opened it. Inside wasn't a picture, but a tiny, folded piece of paper. She stared at it, her expression unreadable, her shoulders slumping with a weight that had nothing to do with wrestling. The comeback of the decade was beginning to look less like a triumphant return and more like a final painful pilgrimage. The world wanted a hero to reclaim her throne, but Aurora Vance was just a woman trying to keep a promise. The night of the match arrived. The world was watching. Aurora Vance versus Jessica Thorne for the World Championship. It was billed as the biggest fight in a generation, legend versus legacy. Aurora made her entrance first, not to the thunderous rock anthem of her past, but to a slow, melancholic piano piece. The crowd was hushed, sensing this was something different. She stepped into the ring and walked directly to the announcer's table, taking the microphone. Jessica Thorne stood in the opposite corner, ready for battle, but Aurora didn't look at her. She looked directly into the main camera, as if speaking to one person in a sea of millions. 7 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear, I defended my championship in this very ring, and that night I went home, and I lost everything that mattered more. The arena was dead silent. My younger sister, Clara, was my biggest fan. She had a degenerative illness, and the doctors told us she only had a few years left. I walked away from all of this to be with her, to fill her last years with joy, not with watching her brother on a TV screen. We traveled. We saw the world. We lived a lifetime in those precious years. Tears were now streaming down her face, but her voice never wavered. She passed away 2 months ago. Before she did, she made me promise one thing. She made me promise that I would come back here, to this ring, and I would leave the way we wanted to. Not as a mystery, but with a proper goodbye. Aurora turned to face her opponent. Jessica, she said, her voice full of a strange and beautiful peace. This championship. It was the reason I wasn't there for my sister for too long. It's a crown I never want to wear again. She walked to the center of the ring, stood before the stunned champion, and did the one thing no one ever expected. She dropped to one knee and then lay down on her back, her shoulders flat against the mat. An offering. An act of surrender that was, in reality, the most powerful move of her entire career. The referee was confused. Jessica Thorne was frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Aurora looked up at her, a genuine warm smile finally breaking through her stoic facade. It's yours, she whispered. Loud enough for the ring mics to pick up. You've earned it. Now do me a favor, and end my story. Jessica, tears welling in her own eyes, looked out at the silent, weeping crowd, and then back at the woman she had once idolized. She slowly knelt down and placed a hand on Aurora's shoulder, a gesture of profound respect. The referee, finally understanding, hesitantly dropped to the mat and counted. 1, 2, 3. The bell never rang for the start of the match. It only rang for the end. Aurora Vance lost. She never threw a punch. And in doing so, she gave the world the greatest finish in the history of the sport, redefining her legacy not by how she held a title, but by how she let it go.